just say one thing? Rick Davis, you put this whole thing together. Your brilliant idea was that we should follow that panel. It's like, come on, man.
I screwed up.
There's a little home court advantage here.
There's
I'm expecting a lot from you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that was riveting and will hopefully set us up well for a conversation. I'm Kelly O'Donnell from NBC News. You know these gentlemen, but let me just remind you, they are really some of the biggest players in American elections.
Once
and always. Of course, you know that they had a fierce rivalry in 2008, but they've done so much across the years, running national campaigns, statewide campaigns, governance, the intersection of politics and the business world, as well as academia. So they have seen it all, done it all. They've survived to tell the tales, and so we're going to talk about some of that today. When I think about elections, I think how they tell the story of where we are right now, what our fellow citizens want their government to do, or not do, or change, or reflect. And so there is so much that tells us something about this moment. So when you look at the electorate of 2026, what has changed? The shifts within each party, Republican, Democrat, Independent, the demographics that have changed, the identity that people have as a voter to claim that label. What stands out to you?
You want to go first, or you want me to go first?
Well, sure, I'll go first.
Yeah.
I think before we talk about what's changed, we should talk about what hasn't changed.
Okay.
We should talk about why Donald Trump got elected in 2024 and the persistent concern that people have had about the cost of living, about the economy as it affects their lives. He was largely elected because people had voted no confidence in the administration before and felt he had some economic mastery. And that led to, for example, a very substantial vote among Hispanic voters who had traditionally voted Democratic, but who are very responsive to economic conditions. And I think that some Republicans may have made the mistake that parties always do when they win by assuming that what happened today is going to happen tomorrow. Now we see an erosion of support among Hispanic voters for the president, but I think it will translate, and it has translated in the elections we've seen since 2024 for Republicans. And this is a problem for Republicans. Young voters.
But tell me about Democrats. I mean, do you see a more activated progressive?
Well, there's no doubt about, I see a more activated Democratic voter, and there are divisions within the Democratic Party, but there's not a division about their attitudes toward the president or their desire for change. You look at every poll and you see an elevated interest among Democrats. And so, I mean, the scenario is, we should point out, and I'm sure we will, there is a very well-established formula about midterm elections. They're always a referendum on the sitting president, and almost invariably the party of the sitting president loses seats. Only twice since World War II has a party gained seats that had the White House. And in both cases in 1998 and in 2002, Clinton and Bush right after 9/11, were very popular. This president is not popular. This president is historically unpopular right now. And while he's not on the ballot, this ends up spilling over on, and I'm looking at Congressman Lawler here, not personalizing it, but he knows the calculus too. Yeah, I think Hispanics, young people, Democrats are activated, and the evidence is pretty clear that unless something changes dramatically, it's going to be a good year for Democrats.
And Rick, do you think Republicans define themselves a little differently now? Is the person voting as a Republican different than a generation ago?
Yeah, I'm a realignment theorist. You know, when I look at the first presidential campaign I worked on as Ronald Reagan, the big thing in those days was, you know, the Reagan Democrats had seen something that the Democratic Party hadn't offered them. And you saw through sort of the power of politics, Reagan, and the massive changes that were going on around the world economically, globalization, right? We've already gone through an entire globalization cycle in my lifetime, but that was changing politics, right? When all of a sudden, you know, the blue-collar workers in these counties in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan were losing jobs and having opportunity taken away from them. These were all Democrats in 1980, every one of them. You know, they were a reliable Democratic Party. Joe Biden used to talk about those guys all the time. That was the party he grew up in. That was his soul of the Democratic Party. But then the campaign I worked on in 2008, we saw the greatest financial collapse in our lifetime and probably in many lifetimes. And that hit them the hardest, right? So these same people who were affected by globalization for 20 years took it right in the chin in 2008. And believe me, it was dramatic. We watched it every day in the last 2 months of the campaign. And even though the Obama administration really were able to take their time, but they got a recovery. It wasn't an even recovery. It was better for urban dwellers. It was better for suburbanites. And so the shift you saw was we were trading our reliable voters in suburban areas who voted every single election. Yeah. They voted in the special elections. They voted in the presidential elections. They voted in the midterms. And we handed them to the Democratic Party because Donald Trump ran a campaign against them. And yet the Democrats, who didn't have a fix for this long period of time where the blue-collar workers were not benefiting from the economic policies of the Democratic administrations, you know, they came over to Donald Trump because he was talking to them. You know, he was anti-establishment. He was trying to empower them. And they heard that voice, and they realigned with the Republican Party. But it wasn't a fair trade because these Democrat voters who are blue-collar, no college education, live in rural areas, they don't vote other than in presidential elections. They don't vote in the special elections. They don't vote in the midterms. Yeah, you're smiling. I know. You deal with this every day. And it's structural. So like when we talk about what's going to happen, David's absolutely right. This is a bad cycle for Republicans no matter what. It's historic. It'll look like 18, and a lot of people say, oh, it's a midterm. It's always bad for the party in power. But structurally, we don't have the cushion we used to have of voters who are identified as Republicans, like these suburban voters, who are going to show up no matter what. We have the voters who are not, you know, motivated to show up in midterms. And frankly, even Donald Trump has put a lot of pressure on them because some of the things he promised them to do in this term, he is kind of flipped on. And we just heard a panel on Iran, and that's a good example.
Yeah.
And so he's suppressing his own vote. We used to run campaigns like, how do I suppress this vote? How do I make Democrats not want to vote for a Democrat, right? That's suppression. Donald Trump is suppressing Republicans. And you have the combination of realignment, insufficient motivation to vote, and suppression by your own party. Good luck, guys. That's hard.
With the Trump of it all, would you...
You're bumming these guys out.
I know I am. That's why I don't do this anymore. I like making people happy, not angry.
When you consider the Trump of it all, would you recommend to Republicans that they ask the White House to say or do something differently to keep the president out of the midterms, more engaged on something different? And then for Democrats, should they be mindful of just an anti-Trump message, that might not be enough?
Yeah. You know, first of all, let me say I had at ASU, I had a good session with Chris LaCivita and Tony Fabrizio at the beginning of the year. And of course, they're very much involved. They've centralized the campaign, and those guys are very much involved. And what they said was, this whole year, it's going to be about our tax cuts, and we're going to put the Democrats on trial, and it's going to be a choice between Democrats and Republicans. And when they find out that they're, you know, pro-crime and pro-immigrant and all this, that the whole thing's going to turn around. And it reminded me, because I have some PTSD from 2010. When we were in similar extremists, and we said, we're going to make this a referendum, we're going to make this a choice. Every party in power says that, But it's almost impossible to do. And of course, we lost 63 seats, which I think I said last time. Parenthetically, I always say Roosevelt lost 68 in 1938, so we were better than Roosevelt. But so I think it's very, very difficult, and it's been exacerbated by this war. And the other thing that complicates their strategy is that the president himself doesn't stick to a strategy. So when they say he's going to go out and he's going to talk, I mean, every time he schedules, he had another one yesterday. He was supposed to be talking about Social Security and their Social Security tax cut. And instead he's talking about how if Robert E. Lee had just won Gettysburg, he would have won the Civil War and he was a great general, and that the affordability thing was a bunch of bullshit. And I mean, he could not have done them more of a disservice, but he does it all the time. And so the other element that you'll hear is, and Fabrizio and last week talked about this, was about money.
The campaign manager.
Yes, was that they studied the past midterms, and one of the reasons they lost so badly was that Democrats have been outspending them for several cycles, but they were going to accumulate a massive amount of money and spend that. And I think that has some effect, but it's hard when the wheel of democracy is turning like this. It's hard to stop it. The concern the Democrats have is what wrenches might they throw in the process relative to voter suppression and use of ICE and those things, and you hear that discussion. The last thing I'd say is the only modification I'd make to what Rick said was this probably isn't going to be like 2018 because there's less elasticity in the electorate. So where did Democrats win 40 seats in that election? I mean, there are only really 30 seats that you'd say are very much in play here. And if it gets to 40, the Senate will be gone, and you'll see a massive Democratic victory. And that could happen. The Senate, I think, is in play, and you wouldn't have said that earlier in the year. But I think there are certain constraints because of the inelasticity of the electorate, and all this redistricting is making it less elastic.
Well, that playing field you're talking about, the redistricting, and we've seen how the Supreme Court removed the Louisiana 2nd district that had majority representation. Other states have been trying to do it. Many say that's going to be a longer term play, but do you think that is shifting the sands for right now?
Look, I think anytime you start messing around with districts, you run the risk of having backlash. I've been through so many redistrictings, and we get all these models, and all the models tell us right where people live, and we carve out those districts street by street, and we think, wow, this is really great. And I think biggest problem I see in this approach is it was done more with a meat cleaver than with a scalpel, right? And so you've got a lot of districts that have been created in places like Texas, and maybe Congressman Goldman can debate me on this, but I would be very worried if I was Republican in Texas right now. Because even though you have less elasticity in the electorate based on the districts we've written, you have more of that sort of inability to deliver the vote that you had in 18, right? So you still had some suburban voters in 18, right? 18 wasn't a year that the collapse of the traditional Republican Party had actually taken effect. 50% of the party in those days said that they were a regular Republican, not a MAGA Republican. Now that's changed. And so when you combine the realignment with, sort of the thinning out of the ranks of, many of these Republican districts in order to, quote, make more Republican districts.
Huge point.
The one thing there's a tipping point. And Donald Trump won Texas, I believe, by 14%. And if you look at the races the Democrats have won since he was elected, you're right on the bubble that they've won in almost every single situation where there was a district, a state, or a county where it was plus 14 for Trump. So they're winning those numbers. So if you apply that to the state of Texas, and you
Yeah.
look at all those districts we redistricted, we not only lose the ones we redistricted, but we lose the ones we took the votes out of to be able to redistrict.
And this is true, I mean, in Florida as well. I mean, you're moving the bricks around and you don't know when the wall's going to collapse on somebody. First of all, I don't think that there's going to be 5 gains. Congressman Goldman may have a different view in Texas. I think it's more likely to be 3 or 4, largely because the Hispanic vote they were counting on, I don't think is going to perform the way they assume it's going to perform. But I think that anytime you take Democrats and spread them around in order to dilute their districts, you're enhancing Democratic support in other districts. And if I were an incumbent in some of these other districts, I'd be saying, you know, I'm not really enthused about this.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to do this, you'd do it after the midterms, not before the midterms, right? Consolidate the party, open up some new opportunities, look for a better cycle, because we know how these cycles work. This is a midterm. It's a referendum on party in power. And so why lean into that, right? Yeah. I mean, everything you've done, you've sort of built this cycle against yourself. And I don't know. I mean, like, I've said this almost every year we've done this panel. I read the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index every single month. The worst it was ever in history was on Election Day in 2008. The party in power has to have at least a 90 percentile. It's 110 points on the scale to win re-election. We were at 54, so there was not much chance that the Michigan Consumer Sentiment was going to be wrong this time. It's been right every time. Today, the Michigan Consumer Sentiment is at its lowest point in history with a party in power of Republicans. Now, that to me is a poll worth watching. Consumers are telling us exactly what the issues are, and it's very simple. If Republicans can't get straight on cost of living, on affordability, whatever you want to call it, right, then I think we are in for a big problem. And I don't know why we aren't seeing more effort on the part of Congress, the Republicans in Congress, to do their own thing, right? They're not going to get this help from the Trump organization, because even though they have the right attitude about what to do, they want to talk about these things. They don't have a spokesman who has the discipline to do it, right?
Well,
and so even though maybe their hundreds of millions of dollars of ads will help save some of these districts because they do have a lot of money, I look back at Newt Gingrich, and what he did at a similar cycle to try and find a way. Let's talk about what Congress is going to do, not what the White House is going to do. Where's the platform for affordability that we're rolling out on Capitol steps in order to say, Republicans, get it. We know what you're doing. Even in an era of high oil prices, high gas prices, we're going to fix all that stuff.
Yeah.
And all you're going to get from Democrats is investigations.
And you know what the first question, Rick, that Kelly and others will ask is, wait, the affordability thing that the president called bullshit?
I know. Look,
I mean,
nothing's perfect this year.
Look, I think everything you say is true. And the other thing is that there are all these distractions that it's not just, the random things he says, but everybody is asking the question who voted for him because of the economy, when is he going to start really focusing on the economy? And when you're focused on everything but the economy, and when you're not interested in talking about the economy, when you call an event to talk about the economy, and you're focused on, ballrooms and arches and all kinds of other things that are irrelevant to people's lives, you are sending a strong message that their concerns are not your priority.
Right.
And I think this is spilling over onto, I bet you these guys, if you ask them, would want them to be talking every single day about the things that they did in their bill and how it helped people and so on. The lack of discipline in a president is a really big problem, particularly when it's a president who demands the stage every single minute of every single day.
Yeah, I would say it is I'm sorry, we're taking over your panel.
It's all right. People want to hear what you have to say. It's okay.
No, you're the boss.
So the larger context in which all of this is happening is somewhat different than a few cycles ago, in that there is this information space that is filled with now AI, with information people don't trust, with concerns that are really in the conspiracy realm about all manner of events and issues. How do campaigns navigate that when simply knowing what is believable is not as easy as it once was? You could have differences about how to attack a problem or what government should do to address a problem, but now we really have a problem with just people accepting the quality of information, and are they getting quality?
Well, people have touched on this in previous answers, in previous discussions, I should say, but we live in this social media era in which you can you are encased in a silo, a bubble, in which your views are affirmed but not necessarily informed, and everybody outside is menacing and dangerous and evil, and people get completely different versions of the same events. And so they have the algorithms provide them with their trusted sources, and we don't have a national discussion, and it's very difficult. But you have to, if you're running a campaign, you have to know who your voters are and what their media habits are and where they get information and who their trusted sources are, and communicate through them. I just want to say my concern, and AI compounds it, is that we have, I mean, I come here because this is a community of people who believe that politics is more than simply a video game in which the red team tries to beat the blue team and the blue team tries to beat there's meaning to it. You hear Cindy McCain talk about having to choose between feeding the hungry or feeding the starving. Well, that's a matter for politics. That's what we should be fighting about or over and fighting to accomplish. But social media has a different project, which is to keep people online, and they have determined that anger, resentment, conspiracy theories are the best way to keep people online. So they want to divide us. They want to provoke us. They want us to believe that the news that they see isn't fair or right to their side, if that's the. And that has become and it's going to be more complicated with AI, even in this election. This is a major, major problem for our democracy. And I think in 2026, but particularly in 2028, this is also going to be a major component of the discussion that we have. Can we fight back against the forces that are trying to atomize us as a country and recapture some sense of an American community?
And how would you counsel candidates to navigate through that, to be able to speak to the issues when they know they're in this viral moment, a vortex of sometimes misinformation, where it's difficult to challenge the leadership of their party, perhaps, or some of the other topics of the day? How would you counsel them?
Yeah, no, it's very tough because sort of trusted information, people that you can rely on. There's no Walter Cronkite, navigating that turf for us. Kind of cheap plug for ASU's Cronkite Center. But anyway, I must say I'm even unnerved by it. I don't know if everybody was listening to that little 250th anniversary video we had. The voice might have sounded familiar. It was ostensibly mine, but I'd never actually uttered a single word in that entire documentary. The boys in the back with all the...
Weirdly, you've never sounded better.
I know. I'm thinking of changing my voice. They just took a couple of things I'd said, put it into some kind of algorithm, and out comes an entire discussion of... and when I heard it for the first time, it kind of was unnerving. Now I'm figuring ways to use it so I don't actually have to talk to people. But look, I mean, one thing on there's always been channels of media, right? I mean, 5 years ago, before we were really, dug in on all the internet stuff and AI, we were complaining about Fox News versus CNN versus MSNBC versus, all these other, I mean, and by the way, you go back in time, history of politics, people had money, had news, and that news had a philosophy and ideology and things like that. So I don't think we're going to beat that one, right? Candidates have become very sophisticated about finding channels to voters that they can talk to directly without the filter of the media for a long time. I did a little research project, mostly just to get smart, on the Trump campaign this last cycle. And he used those mechanisms in a way that was incredibly direct, right to voters.
Yeah.
He used them in a way that was incredibly inexpensive in August before the election, his payroll was $300,000 a month, and the Harris campaign was $6 million a month, right? And so when you start looking at what's changed in politics, it's how we talk to voters.
Yeah.
It's both a good thing in that we have an enormous amount of data, we can identify the predilections of voters, and we can answer their questions and talk directly to them. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a message to put in the pipe to the voters you want to talk to, none of that's going to work.
Well, you also have to be adroit at doing it, and he is. You know, I was saying earlier to someone, you know, authenticity is the coin of the realm in politics, and particularly presidential politics. And the most authentic candidate generally wins. And people say, "Well, Donald Trump." It's like, whoever said, "Gee, I wish Donald Trump would just speak his mind." I mean, that's never an issue. He does, right. And he's very comfortable right. in those. I will just say this, you know, because I hear this argument a lot, like we had yellow journalism and we had radio and we had, you know, we've had succeeding generations of media and it has changed politics. The insidious thing about this is that we're not choosing the media, they're choosing us. In social media, the algorithms, they have more data on us than we have on ourselves. They know our hot buttons, and they are pushing them to produce a result. And it is a caustic thing that we're going to have to contend with in our politics. But
let me ask this: you have built this forum for many years around character-driven leaders. Do you think there is a moment for character-driven citizenship, in that people have to try to counteract those things, being absorbed in a one-channel universe or being swept up in some of the different competing stories that make it hard for them to assess what do they want in a candidate? Are they tired of the noise and therefore less likely to vote? Do you think there is a burden on the voter today to shift their sense of engagement?
Yeah, not just to do that. And I think we do have to help, because we have to raise the saliency of the challenge and make people more aware of how the process is manipulating us. But it's also, you know, it was mentioned earlier, because all of this is polarizing us more, not just social media, but redistricting and so on. And that is, you know, that is really empowering the most strident voices in either party. And it's like, well, you know, those are the people who dominate primaries. They dominate primaries because everybody else sits around and says, well, I'm not going to participate in a primary. If you know, so we do have responsibilities as citizens. You know, Justice Brandeis said the most important office in a democracy is the office of citizen. I believe that, and we need to activate citizens to fight back and not just, you know, curse the darkness.
Yeah, and I would say, too, I mean, one of the things that I'm encouraged by, right, I don't mean to sound like, you know, technology is a negative. We're not going to put that back in the box, right? The genie's out.
Only go in one direction.
Congressman Goldman, he must have said the genie was out of the bottle 25 times. I agree with you, Craig. Yeah. Yeah, my wife tells me I exaggerate. I don't know what she's talking about. But you do see movements now where schools are telling kids you got to put your phone away if you're going to come into the school. Yeah. Entire communities are banning social media at certain age groups. Look, I think there, you know, like with everything with the United States, we're a pendulum, right? We try out new stuff. We get weary of that. We swing that pendulum back and we try out something different. And that we can't stay focused on anything. That's swinging back another way. And I think all this will find a way. And there's a lot of damage that gets done in the meantime. But that's what makes us so tough, is that we take that damage and keep moving. And so I think there are smart people around Capitol Hill who are going to start figuring out ways of legislating that. I think there's going to be more impetus by voters to get them to do that. You know, it's going to be a real draw for members of Congress to say, hey, I'm trying to do something to help protect your children, help protect, you know, the information you get. Don't overdo it, but like something will probably be done. But this point about citizenship, I think, is critical. In the state of Arizona, 70% of the local elections are uncontested. Think about that. I mean, like, I like contesting elections. It's what we used to do for a living. And you've got an entire state where 70% of the people who run for local office don't have an opponent. Now,
And this isn't because they're exemplary?
I'm sure it is.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, even exemplary people should have an opponent.
I agree.
Keeps them honest.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more.
And so I think the question is going to be a generational question. You know, we spent a lot of time at the Institute, how to get people motivated, how to get people involved, how to find politics of common ground so that there's some expectation that you can actually get something done if you enter into politics, whether it's at the council level in a city, you know, or a statewide election. And so I think there's the opportunity exists. We used to think that we had to do a lot of different things to get voters to show up in the polls. And I would say that's less of a problem now. We have record number of people showing up for presidential elections, almost on a successive basis now, over 70%.
We've gotten them to come out by pissing them off.
Well, I mean, I would
Not
rather
by
have
inspiring
an
them, but
angry
by
voter
pissing
who
them
shows
off.
up than that complacent voter sitting there clicking his TV rather than showing up and voting. So I think once you get them into the category of participating in the great civic experiment of the United States, you got their attention, right? What you do with them at that point in time.
I think people need to be persuaded that it matters. I think people, I've said often that the democracy from the very beginning has been a battle between cynicism and hope. And the cynics are sort of on the march here. And people need to believe that if they cast a vote, that it matters and that things are going to change and that it's not just a perfunctory exercise. You know, I look over here at Vladimir and some of the others who have spoken here, and the price that he was willing to pay to give people what we have, and that we have taken for granted. But that we've seen, a long string of systemic failures that have made people more jaundiced about the system. Rick says, you know, I said before that there is a campaign to be waged to ensure that we in some way help run the algorithms and they don't run us. I think that there is that there. I will also note that in the Illinois primary, and I think it's true all over the country, that the AI folks have spent millions and millions of dollars trying to influence primaries with hastily created committees like, Citizens for Seashells and Balloons and other misleadingly named.
It can be dangerous, you know.
Yeah, I know.
There's a lot of that.
Yes.
The walk on the beach is not so simple.
Right.
One of the benefits of this panel coming at the end is that all of the guests here have been able to be engaged in these conversations about issues far and wide. And so much of that ultimately plays into an election. So I want to just open up the floor. If you have a question to our resident chiefs of election, please make yourselves known. I have lots of questions, but I like to try and open it up, which we don't normally get to do in our day job. Yes, we have a taker there. Young gentleman will come to you. Make it a good one. And
the nice thing about this is you always worry about the ringer in the audience. We have an entire audience of ringers. So, I mean,
I think we got an entire audience.
Time is limited, gentlemen, so let's get to our question.
Entire audience of people who want to go drinking here. I don't think we've helped in that regard either.
David, you're not helping on time.
I'm sorry.
Let's go.
I'm Matt Spence. What is going to happen in the California governor's election, and how much is there a threat there could be to Republican nominees, and what needs to change to think about the political realignment you were talking about with California politics?
Yeah, it's a kind of messy deal.
Yeah.
And it operates differently.
I do
than
not
other
believe that
states.
there are going to be two Republican candidates at the end, and there's a bumper cars thing going on between Democrats with a bunch of imperfect candidates to see who might win. And one of my questions is, does the bumper cars, as often happens in multi-candidate fields, yield an unexpected result? And that could happen, because now Tom Steyer, who's spent over $150 million of his own money so far, is now going after Javier Becerra, who emerged,
You mean Governor Steyer?
Yeah. I mean, and, then you have other candidates who might, if they savage each other enough, there's still might emerge there. But I suspect, and I feel pretty confident, that you're going to see a race with at least one Democrat and maybe two.
But I have an elixir for California, and since I pay real estate taxes in California, I feel empowered to have an opinion about California, even though I don't know anything about Democratic politics in California. But there are two things I would do to fix California. Get rid of the jungle primary, because nobody who works in politics likes jungle primaries, because you can always get a surprise. And that's what you've got basically in California, where everybody runs against each other at one time. And it's incredibly difficult to figure out how to win those. Two, get rid of referendums and initiatives, right? We went through this process in America that said, oh, let's let the voters tell us how to legislate. Well, that's never really that good of an idea, and I can say that. You guys can't, but, you know, look at California. That legislature doesn't actually function. You know, the people of the state of California get to make decisions on their budgets, on their expenditures, on their appointments. You name it, it's a participatory democracy. And even though that looks great in a political science textbook and how to get people involved in government, it's a disaster for running the fourth largest economy in the world. And so, like, it's really simple. Change your constitution, get rid of that, get rid of the jungle primary, and California will prosper.
Wow, it's just that easy. Spoken like a guy who no longer runs campaigns, because people make a lot of money off of those.
I know, that's part of it. I wasn't going to go there.
And the clock is not on our side. So as much as I have more questions, and I know that this gathering does, we'll leave those for the barbecue tonight. Thank you both. It certainly is going to be an eventful election season. Thank you all so much for your attention.
Yeah. And if I could say just one thing, since being chairman, I get the privilege of doing that. I want to thank the team at the McCain Institute who put all this stuff on, Evelyn and Brittany Pinaro and her group. They did a spectacular job. I think we would all agree with that. I know Evelyn's going to talk about this too. But I also want to thank all the speakers and moderators, because I really do. Every year I say, oh, this is the best group of speakers and moderators, and we're the only two that actually come back every year. But I really think they did a fabulous job.
Because we travel the least distance.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, you know, I think we had something special this weekend. I hope you all feel that way. And let's have a great evening tonight. And I'll get out of the way of my boss here.
Thank you.